Well, I have this one on, isn't it? Coming through. Maybe this will be double loud. Come and have a seat, everyone, and we'll get started. And does someone want to volunteer to be a microphone runner? Pam's got her hand up. That's great. You did it last time or the time before. So don't want to make you do it every time. I think Pam is going to do it. You can hand it to her when she comes. She's coming from the back.
Testing.
Where's Tom? Tom, are you up top? Did you make this coffee cake? He's coming down. He did make it. It's delicious.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Go ahead. This is
Yeah, you made this? Very good. Yeah. I don't know if any other treats are made or if they were just bought, but this, very good. Let us pray. Almighty and everlasting God, by whose grace the whole body of your faithful people is governed and sanctified, receive our supplications and prayers which we offer before you for all members of your holy church, that in their vocation and ministry they may truly and devoutly serve you. Through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. So these parish meetings are a way for us to gather each month and just to catch up with one another, have our voices be heard, concerns, whatever, encouragements, anything that's going on, keep people up to date with things that are happening, but also examine ourselves, right? Our identity, our mission as a parish, where we are, where we're headed, and give everyone an opportunity to participate in that kind of conversation, moving us forward. Sometimes we might focus more on particular aspects of our parish life together. Last month, because of our pledge drive, we focused on stewardship and had a stewardship, sort of more directed stewardship conversation and teaching time as well, really. And today I would like to do just focus more on our identity as a parish, who we believe ourselves to be and who we hope to be. Right? I think it's important for us to call upon one another to hope and dream for the life of our community. Right? And so that's what I would like to do today. We had a vestry sort of day retreat yesterday in which we talked through a lot of this stuff. And who are we? Who do we believe ourselves to be? Where do we see ourselves to be headed? You can think of it as a preferred narrative, right? Looking at the story of St. Paul's. Where do we want that story to be headed, to be now? Who do we want to be and become as a community? In our conversations together, I don't think we need to lay out like really strict sort of boundaries or touchstones or something for conversation, a love and respect for each other, obviously, but also that it's, any kind of sharing, whether it's together in a big group like this or we break into small groups, is invitational, right? No one is demanded to say anything or to participate in any way. You can just sit and listen if you like, and you can always pass. Recognizing that our interactions with one another are acts of prayer, okay? That God is present in and among us, and that Christ is present and we serve Christ in one another. Question for discernment, maybe as a place to start, is what is most important for the life and health of the congregation at this particular time in our history and the life of our story? It doesn't have to be one thing. We talk about different sort of priorities. But ways into this, I want us to start first by considering a time in our lives when we felt a deep and acute encounter with God. In a time when we knew God was present. It doesn't have to be some, deeply, spiritual practice. You were in prayer for 4 hours and, sweating blood or, whatever, stigmata or something. Anything in your life in which you knew God is here, first off. Second off, how is that experience connected to the life of the parish? Now, maybe that's this one, maybe it was 30 years ago in a different one, or, whatever. How is the life of the church, how was the life of the church, or how is the life of the church community embedded in that experience of God? So think to your, and that can be directly, like something happening at or with church people, or just the way that the church taught you to exist in the world, to be in the world, and to live a life of prayer and service to others, or whatever opened you up to knowing and experiencing God. Anything come to mind? Bob?
Well, when I was 11, 12 years old, maybe, and we happened to be living in Wellesley at the time, not that that's relevant, and people in the family were getting sick, and there was something very important that I wanted to do, and I said right out, without question, I will not get sick, and I didn't. And I know 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years later, it was God that I was praying to and asking for that, and I was granted that prayer.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah. Anything else? I think in general, too, what spiritual practices, what in your life, whether it's long walks or particular types of prayer, being at the Eucharist, singing songs, serving others who are in need. There might be general things too, rather than a particular overwhelming experience, Yeah, Lee.
Okay, it's a little bit long and convoluted.
That's all right.
So I grew up in the Episcopal Church and have been in an examination of spirituality for a long time, ranging from Episcopal to agnosticism to atheism to fundamentalism to going to Lutheran college, taking courses in theology there. And in 12-step programs, specifically as a son of an alcoholic who was in AA for 35 years, I grew up around program. So I was living in Arizona, and I was working as an engineer, and our company had been taken over, and they decided to lay off people. After 2 years of promising no layoffs, they laid off 40% in 1 week. And it hurt a lot of people, of course. I got caught up in that. And so this was right at the time of the dot-com bust, and there were no jobs anywhere in technology. And I remember being in the shower, and I had this strange prayer. God damn it, what do you want me to do? That was the prayer. And I pounded on the shower wall. And I had taken up the only position that I could find at the time, which was working, studying to be a corrections officer. I was going to work at the prisons in Arizona. And I was in the academy. And I had been sending out hundreds and hundreds of applications for engineering jobs and hadn't heard a single response. And this is actually pretty comical because I got an email right within 10 minutes after my pounding on the shower wall saying, would you like to interview for a position up in Bend, Oregon? And so I couldn't miss a day of the academy because if you missed a day, you were out, but they managed to schedule the event for a weekend for my interview. And I went to get on the flight, and they have monsoons in Arizona. It's like a 5th season where it just rains with heavy rain. All the flights were canceled, and I was going, oh my God, I'm never going to make it. And so I went over to the counter, and I'll still remember the lady's name was Angel. And Ms. Angel managed to find me a circuitous route up to Bend, Oregon from Tucson, Arizona. Well, I made it up for the interview, and then we, of course, had to find a place to live, which ended up being on Faith Drive. And so Angel got me up to Bend, Oregon, onto Faith Drive. And you know, it could just all be completely circumstantial, you know, it could just be coincidence, but I tend to look at it as God acting in my life and perhaps doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thanks. No, that's great. And that idea of, I think, God's presence with us in the circumstances is really important. I mean, this is a countercultural way of speaking and existing. Is one of the reasons why I think this exercise, just to get things out there, is important. To speak about we are self-sufficient, you know, on our own, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. This is our sort of culture, right? And to recognize that we're people actually of great need, and that we rely upon God, and that God is present, is a radically countercultural way of existing, right, in the world. To even speak about God present and in a real way in our lives is difficult to do. So I think the main point is that God is in all things, everywhere, all the time. The issue is our lack of openness and awareness to that. You know, people talk about the lives of saints are great things that happen, you know, throughout history, and lives that are lived in deep love that show us Jesus as just sort of cracks in the world, right? Where that, and in people's lives, where the love of God and the power of God, the action, the grace and mercy of God is always present, but we just need to crack open a little bit and let it through, right? To recognize that what's happening in our lives is of God. If anyone else wants to jump in with that, that's fine too. But I think it just gets us going, thinking about a little bit, and then thinking about how our life with God is or isn't, or can be in other ways or whatever, supported by this community, this parish, and how we can bring others to faith and supporting them as well. Another ways of thinking about this might be questions of what brought you to this church? However long ago or recent that was, and when are we at our best? When are we at our best? Could be when were we at our best too, if you think about, you know, 30 years ago, if you've been here a really long time, and then why? But when are we at our best, right? In our life together as a parish, when are we at our best? What are we doing well? What are we doing that is distinctive and unique? What are we doing that matters in the world around us? Why is the world around us, our community, a different place, a better place, because we are here? And I think it might be helpful if, like, 3, 4, 5 people, if you just sort of turn to each other, and if anyone wants to, in your group, give an answer to that question. And again, it's always invitation, not demand. There's no share or die policy, right? So pass if you don't want to. What brought you to the parish? When are we at our best? And then we'll come back together and see what people come up with. But sort of just small groups. raise your hand if you want 2 more minutes. Yeah, okay. Okay, hand up if you need another minute, or if you're good. Okay, let's come back together as a full group. Right. What do we come up with? Who wants to contribute from their own perspective? Lori Jones texted me, watching from PA. I'm texting back now. Everyone say hi, Lori and Jeff. Great. So, great. Yeah, John.
What brought us to this church was, at the time, our son Colin was gay. You know, admitted he was gay, and we were at a parish that was not open and affirming. And we had been with that parish for almost 10, 12 years. So it was very hard for us to grieve the loss of that family. But knowing that our son was, you know, who he is. And God loves him for who he is. So that was one reason why we came to this faith, that they're open and affirming. And I think one of the things we talked about, I guess, being a church family, and what's important to me is honoring and loving each other as we serve. And part of that balance is, you know, we all know there's so many things to do to support the church. But we don't want to overwhelm ourselves and each other with so many tasks that we feel burnt out, or we don't have enough energy or love to give in every single ministry moment. And so I think it's important for us to reflect and say, you know, what can we do and do well and with enough resources within ourselves? And maybe that might mean saying there's some part of our ministry that's been part of us for a long time or whatever that we might want to step away from, or how do we find more resources, more human time to support those? Because they are so valuable. And also honoring those who come to church who simply want to sit and be with the Lord and be spiritually fed and may not have the energy to participate in more activities. So I think it's a balance of us loving and honoring people where they are and supporting them, and that's something that we all have to kind of learn to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great things. So I'm just jotting a few things down. So as far as what's a significant thing about the community, you know, like that brought your family here, inclusivity, right? Inclusivity, inclusiveness.
Yeah.
And then it's also some important going forward, and we'll bring this up with other things too. The significance of loving one another, parish self-care, we might call it.
Yes.
Even though I don't really like that term, but what other terms do we have for it? And our capacity to do what we're doing and what we may not be able to do.
Stu and I have both been around here for quite a few years, and we were kind of talking about quite a few years ago, there were way more kids involved. I remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, I've been here that long, there were 25 acolytes.
Yeah.
And then we were talking about youth groups and talking about the difference in the way family life is and all the things that are pulling kids away from church on Sunday morning, mainly sports. Those things didn't exist so much for my kids and Stu's kids at the time to pull them away from a Sunday morning. And so I think we saw more full families coming to church in those days. And I don't know whether there's any way to overcome the constraints, the differences in lifestyle today from then. But we were talking about it was different.
Yeah. Yeah. So something about maybe when we're at our best, maybe in that in one way we can be at our best is that ministry to young people and children that contributes to that.
I don't know whether that's the best.
Well, yeah, it contributes to us being at our best. It's a part of it, right? It's a part of it. Yeah. Yeah, we can talk more about that. We talked a lot about it yesterday at Best. We've been talking about it a lot as a parish, several of us, but also as a church universal, nationwide and worldwide. Like this is, for decades, this has been happening with decline. And then the pandemic hit in 2 years. In this diocese, it was not legal. Like you couldn't do anything with kids, at least in person. And they're burnt out already through Zoom school, to do more online. And so it's about rebuilding. There really is a sense. There was already basically a sense in most churches before the pandemic of having to start from scratch because they dwindled to basically nothing, like children's ministries around. But now after the pandemic, it literally is building from scratch. Encouraging this morning, 10% of our congregation, a little over 10% of our congregation was children. And we're not, and that's before sort of some act of rebuilding something specifically for them, which we're working on doing. Some of us, like Deirdre, Laney, Father CJ, are involved in trying to do this. But that's even before any of that, so that's encouraging. And it's not, but it is a universal problem, and I think we need to recognize that and have grace with one another in that. In conversations with other clergy in this diocese and others, and interdenominationally. This is, and some still have very active, children's and youth ministries, like particularly go to churches in the South or whatever, the Bible Belt, where you put up a sign outside and, to start a church, and 100 people come the first Sunday, right? Like people just go to church, right? This is what people do. Even there, pre-pandemic, I know of a parish, coming out of the pandemic and regathering. Right now in Atlanta, a big church has about 35 kids, which sounds great until you realize they had 135 before the pandemic. And they were running 600, and now they have 200. You think, wow, 200 people on Sunday morning, that's great, but they were running 6. So, as an example, another church I know in New York went from about 150 to 175 per Sunday to 35 people after the pandemic. And so I think we need to recognize the scope of what we're dealing with, right? And which enables us to have grace with one another and take a deep breath and not get frustrated or, sort of upset that we can't magically be what was 30 years ago or something, and at the same time recognize that there's work to do, right, and that we can move forward with this. I think we should be encouraged that we're essentially at in-person pre-pandemic numbers, and I don't know of other churches where that's happening. In conversations with other clergy, and again, in and beyond the diocese. And then we have just as many people watching on online at home, not necessarily live at 9 a.m. on a Sunday, but by like Monday evening, so people have gone. So 70 people or so or whatever in church, and then another at home, doubling that. And that's really encouraging. And so many people in this parish have worked really hard to keep us going during the pandemic. There was never a sense of putting the brakes on here, right? There was never a sense of putting the brakes on, even when the doors were locked. And I think there's a lot of recognition that needs to happen for those, who worked so hard to do that for everyone in the rest of the parish, and sort of recognize the sort of wonderful, just brilliant steadfastness, right, that the parish has shown, and that we are at essentially pre-pandemic numbers. Even in person, and that's not even including those still watching at home. And then also recognize the work that encouraging news should lead us to, right? That there's building to do, while recognizing capacity and so that's that parish self-care as well. So what else? Inclusivity, key point for our parish. Loving and serving one another within the parish, not just without, and kids and youth.
To add a little to that last quickly, I think a piece of what maybe needs to, not just children, but it's the parents of the kids. I mean, I have daughters in their 30s.
Yeah.
They're the ones that, how old are the people that go to your church? Like, I don't even think it's the children, it's the parents of the children that need something to draw them back. It's that 20 to 40-year-old grouping that have lost their way, because that's probably why their children aren't coming. But what can we do to draw them in? They need activities that's couple activities, like young couples or, you know what I mean? I mean, always hear about the children, but never about the parents of them. So that's my thought. I just know my girls.
No, absolutely. And look, I'm of an age where I want to have friends in church too, right? So believe me, I feel this, and it has some ideas even coming in, right? Part of it is capacity again, and being completely overrun and overwhelmed in some ways with all the amazing things that are happening in the parish. I'm not just speaking to me about the parish as a whole, and adding new things, but had some sort of plans and vision for that coming, and then came in January of 2020, right, when it was decided that we would come, that our family would come here from England, all excited, whatever, and then by the time we came, we were on a, socially distant flight to landing into lockdown and quarantine for a few weeks because I came from out of the country, right? And it's like, well, what can we possibly do right now that really draws people together? But we're coming out into a place now. Of course, the pandemic still exists, right? We don't want to go that far, but we're into a place now where we can do things, but it's not, even mentioning, Val, that sort of how to bring them back. This is part of the generational divide too. It's not bringing them back, it's introducing them to the church in the first place. The majority of people I know my age have never been to church at all.
Right.
So, that's another thing. It's like, what does that look like? What does that mean?
Just to that end, I've heard a few people mention this in the past few weeks. I don't know, Father Jared, if there's a membership committee now, or maybe one should be reformed to the end of just getting a diversified group of us who can get some brainstorming together as to how we attract those who have not either come back or didn't come to begin with, from all the different age ranks, which would include families. And that's a lot of heavy lifting, and I know that as I say it, because it's easier to form a committee than to actually think of what you can do to make those things happen. But
Yeah.
you have to start somewhere, and I think there's a lot of energy that's forming with your leadership and other people in the church who probably would jump on board to do that. I certainly would.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important point. It's something else we've been talking about and dealing with, and how do we get people, because we've had lots of new people coming, which is great. You're one, Dorothy. Welcome. And it doesn't mean not just to welcome them into this place, but make them a part of the family, right? And enrich that. And I want to get to taking a step back. So when we're talking about like practical ways forward like this, and there has been a membership committee. Ed led it brilliantly for several years, and we need to look at it again and reshape, reform a bit. I think. What was I saying? Yeah, stepping back a little bit. So to what it is about our identity that makes us who we are, right? Okay, if we have a goal of incorporating new members, bringing people in, adding people to the family, why? Right? What's the purpose of that? Like, the goal isn't just get more bums on seats, right? It has to be like, why do we want people with their bums on the seats? So if we can step back a little bit, what is it about our identity as a parish, about our mission, life together, which makes that even something that is desirable, right? You don't have to answer that question right now, but whatever we're thinking about, if you're jumping immediately to solution or something to do, take a step back and think about, well, why would we do that? And is it aligned with our identity and our mission, which of course is ultimately just the mission of God, the reconciliation of all things to God in Christ by the Holy Spirit, right? That's our mission. But how we as a parish in our time and place, affect that. Is something. Susan, did you have something?
I just had some ideas about it. So I actually have lots of different ideas, but I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about is we could do sort of workshop weekends. I had been to one when my marriage was failing.
Sorry, workshop?
Workshop weekends.
Oh,
so
yeah.
bringing people in and doing small groups. And the one that we went to was all about supporting marriage and family.
Yeah.
And I think that, obviously the divorce rate is so ridiculously high right now because I think we don't have support, or people don't ask for support until it's either too late or so much water's gone over the bridge it's really hard to recover. So even having just groups of how to support one another in the family situation, so people don't feel so alone, or just having some support of helpful ways to communicate with your partner so you're on the same page and you're moving in the same direction instead of fighting each other.
Yeah.
So just even taking a critical look at how your relationship is working or not working and what things you can do to help.
Sure.
So it's just offering support to the community, I guess is what I'm saying. But in that, I was thinking for the young families, that's something that I'm sure that people will need because, like I said, the divorce rate is so high.
Yeah, and a lot of that discernment is about what is one capable of, and is one the best to take that on. And in some ways, surely maybe we could be, but there's also a point of recognizing limitations. And I mean, a large part of my job is that pastoral counseling and sitting down with people, right? But I also have to be aware that I'm not a professional psychologist and direct people, to that help when it's needed, or family counseling or whatever it is. So yes, but it's a great point, especially providing, even if it's just providing space and avenues that a professional does take on, which requires resources and stuff like that as well. But it's great to throw out the ideas. So again, just taking a step back to what brought you to this church. When are we at our best? What are we doing well? What are we doing distinctively and unique?
Just kind of reporting for our little
Yeah.
group, if that's okay. So we're all here because we're cradle Episcopalians.
Yeah.
So the two things that came out of our brief little discussion here were, I think, what works here is offering a place where people
leave their baggage at the door and offer a place that is a place where a person can belong, and so a place of belonging and being recognized and welcome and known. And then also just thinking that, you know, yesterday in our vestry retreat, we spent a lot of time, I feel like a lot of the comments about what work at St. Paul's were about kind of the past, and it sort of occurred to me, and then it was also echoed by some of our group members today, that we feel like the worship service is actually at a really at a peak right now and working well for St. Paul's. We feel like that's something that really is working, carrying on the tradition of the Episcopal. Am I saying it right? Yes. Okay. All right. Anyway, anything else you wanted to?
Well, I do have something I
Need
want to say,
clarifying.
because I was talking with Lisa about what keeps me coming back in spite of many things is that I'm very aware in a visceral way that when people walk through that door, they just leave all the junk at the door, and they're very available and sort of shed everything that gets in the way of actually connecting with other human beings. So I'm extremely grateful for that. But I'm a good example of a person who struggles with the Episcopal Church, and yet I come to church, and I have to spend a lot of time when I'm in church just not letting all that stuff that doesn't resonate with me bother me.
Yeah.
And I've learned how to do that, and I'm still here, at least some of the time. And I feel that a church, any church, there should be a way to navigate regardless of how many of the little boxes you can tick off in the Nicene Creed.
Yeah, yeah,
There should be a way. I shouldn't have to do all that work myself.
yeah.
And it's probably happening. I'm just not articulating it because I do keep coming
you're
back.
here,
So
yeah.
clearly something is working. But I feel that it's not recognized in a public way, that the degree, the boxes that we all can tick off in the Nicene Creed is different for everybody. I mean, some of you might be able to tick off every box, I don't know. But I feel I would love to hear some public acknowledgement of that
Yeah. Well, there certainly
within the
has
body
been.
of the service.
Yeah, yeah. There certainly has been in sermons and things. It might be on weeks that.
Well, we're all God's
Where-
children, yada yada, but and which is true, which I that means something to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
I don't want to have to do all that work
Yeah, yeah.
myself.
And we've had the. and
Do
we've
I
had-
have to?
No, absolutely not. We've had conversations before too about
Yeah, I
providing
know.
space. Yeah.
All right, that's enough.
That where belief is difficult and how we define belief as where is that trust, offering ourselves to something outside of ourselves, God in this community, whatever, or is it having to believe all the certain things all the time that, and the point of communal confession, one of the points of communal confessions of the creed, right, is that when you can't say a certain line, everyone else is saying it for you, right? You're not doing it on your own, right? Like, so there's the belief of the church, which upholds and bolsters up my personal or someone else's personal unbelief or difficulty with that belief too. Like the communal aspect is really important. And if there's days where I personally, might be frustrated in my faith and find aspects difficult, the creed or otherwise, someone else's faith is holding me up, right, or belief, and I think that's an important part of it. But also, I think that there are ways to provide certain types of, whether it's within the service and without, opportunities for people to live out some of that together. Spaces for dialogue and conversation, all of that is real and possible as well. And you know, it might not happen every week because you try to preach the scriptures. That's what I'm here to do, and then the sermon slot. But it definitely has been addressed to doubt and disbelief and living with it and stuff. Everyone obviously isn't here every week, and we miss sermons, and you know that's sort of sometimes part of it too. I saw a great meme the other day, and I've experienced both of these in different parts of my life. Both of these things. It was the professor, you know, with questions coming from the students. The answer is it's on the syllabus, right? And then it was pastor or priest, someone coming with a question, and it was like, it's been announced for the last 6 weeks. It's on the website. It was in the newsletter 4 times, and I've preached about it 6 times in sermons, right? You know, but we're not all engaged in all those different ways to the same levels, and sometimes don't get it. But providing those opportunities is important. So, but as far going back to what we're trying to deal with, we've got aspects of our identity, inclusivity. The welcome and belonging, our liturgy and worship, kids and youth, welcome. These things are central to who we are. What else is involved in that? Anything that we're missing? Is it Bev and Susan?
So our group talked about when St. Paul's has been at its best. And we all joined here at different eras, different decades and times. But the common theme that we found was community and fellowship. So community meaning coming to church and worshiping together as a family, and also the importance of coffee hour, how people have a chance to talk and get to know each other and engage. And even going back, the fairs and fundraisers that we've had where, like the fall fair where you had the women's group and they were knitting and doing their crafts, and people were baking, and people were all towards the same event together, and everyone was working together. And so community and fellowship, we just felt like that was a good time when St. Paul's was at its best.
So the other thing that I was thinking about that's really, to me, has been super helpful is just the fact that both the Episcopal Charge writ large and also St. Paul's allows and encourages your personal relationship with Jesus, or your personal relationship with God, however you see him. So it's not like, I mean, I've certainly been to evangelical churches where you're literally spoon-fed, this is what you have to believe. And that is not at all what I've ever found. I'm also a cradle Episcopalian, but that's never what I've ever found in the Episcopal Church. It's your own relationship, and what does that look like, and how do you live out that service, that community. And it's okay if we see God differently, or we believe in, one person believes in angels and one person does. It doesn't matter. We are all here together to support one another, and it's learning about each other, about each other's faith, about the Christian faith through the eyes of Episcopalianism. But there's so much room for diversity and for different points of view and for supporting one another, as long as we're all open to doing that and accepting. It's a safe space too, so accepting people for who they are and what they have to bring.
Great, thanks, Susan.
And so just to advocate for our little group, at our best, inviting youth to pizza, and also wondering if there was an opportunity to create some support capability for persons caring for those with disabilities and children with disabilities, either in the church or the community.
Yeah. So we could, if people, it seems that a lot of the conversation is getting directed towards practical things that people like to do rather than these aspects of our identity, as Father CJ just brought up and some others have, and we can go that direction. A couple things I thought I would want to mention too, to input part of when I think that we're at our best. We are a people of, it's a house of prayer, people of worship, right? And so that is at the center of what we do, but not just because we like playing church and being in here, but because the grace of God flows down from the altar through the doors and windows of the church to change the world, right? And I think the way that this community for decades, I think, has had an awareness of the needs of the community, even when other places haven't. Or other parts of the community don't recognize the need. This parish has been aware of it and moved to action. Whether that was, it wasn't called this at the time, but the Jeannie Geiger Center, which started here. Most people don't think Newburyport has a food insecurity problem. We will serve 15,000 meals this year and among friends, right? There is a food security problem. Most people are completely blind to it in our area, but this parish hasn't been. And obviously, the refugee resettlement work as well. Stepping into these things, I think we're at our best when we live the love of Jesus with one another and caring for each other and the community aspects that we're talking about, but also related to that, when we're serving the world in need. So thinking through these aspects of our identity, from inclusivity to kids and youth, to welcome and membership and belonging, sense of belonging, community and fellowship, our liturgy and worship, our spiritual formation and relationship with God, openness to God and one another, our service in the world around us, right? These are things that have come out in our conversation. Who do we then hope to become? What does it mean if this identity that we're claiming of who we are, these aspects of our lives, what does it mean if it's lived out? What impact does that have in our lives as a community and in the world around us? What is our hope and dream for this community based on these things that we've pointed out? It doesn't need to be a practical that will be, there'll be 84, children by 2025. This is not what that's not what we're talking about. But what does it mean if we live out an inclusive, welcoming, belonging, worshiping, serving, praying community in our lives and in the lives of those around us?
I was just at a funeral yesterday for our good friend.
Yeah.
And someone said that she was the skin of Jesus, which means she embodied what Jesus would be in front of you. You were the center of the world when that person was with you. That person gave you support, honored where you were, helped you if you needed help, found resources. If we were Jesus, if we were lived like Jesus, I think that would be our ultimate success.
Yeah. In what ways do we see that happening now in our community?
Well, you see it among friends, you see it in the basement.
Yeah.
That's all, just the obvious, those are the obvious ones, among friends, housing refugees. your discretionary fund. Yeah, those are the most
Yeah,
obvious.
yeah, there's very apparent ways.
Yeah, I think it happens also on a more individual basis. Just, every human being has, I believe, has the need to be seen and recognized and honored for whatever it is that they are. It doesn't matter whether they're, particularly skilled or they're a human being that needs to be honored and loved. And I think that happens in this parish, just, person to person, more than any parish I've ever been in. And that's been true really since we first came here, 1999, Christmas Eve. So, we're sort of back to some of the first things we see.
Lee?
So it was interesting. I don't think we've just had a pandemic. We've had a polydemic, politics that was very sick.
Yeah.
And the world has changed a lot in terms of its focus. People have lost rights, and people that are marginalized have become more marginalized. So we have a parish here, in my brief experience, that takes a stand against marginalization, But how is that displayed? One of the reasons I'm here is my daughter happened to see the rainbow banner out in front of the parish and said, well, maybe you should look at going there, But one of the, we're talking about the millennials, let's just say, and their lack of interest in organized religion, and a lot of that, I believe, has to do with not understanding that organized religion goes so strongly against their roots in freedom of belief and freedom to be who they need to be, that they just, it turns them off totally, And so one of the questions I have for the parish is, how do we present who we really are and make us stand out, as opposed to just being lumped in with the rest of the tide that is trying to take away rights and to limit what is truly human. So, that's...
Yeah, that's a good...
So that's how I'm here, because of that. My daughter saw your rainbow banner out front.
Yeah, that's great, yeah.
Take what Lee just said, which I think is absolutely true, and put it in a larger context. And it has to do with introducing new people to the church. The First War and the Second War made incredible, fundamental changes in our culture and the way people related to one another and the way they related to institutions. The pandemic has had exactly the same effect on our culture today, and I have no answers as to what to do it, but I think when thinking about introducing the church to people, you have to try to identify what basic changes have actually happened as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, it's an important observation, yeah. Living as this expression of the life and love of Jesus in our time and place, as John, to summarize what John was saying and how others have contributed to what that looks like. And let's take a few ministries that have stuck out in that, service ones, outreach, mission, among friends, refugee resettlement, etc. Membership, drawing in new people, kids and youth, our worship, which includes music. These key things. Some other important suggestions of things, whether it's care for struggling families and relationships and things like that, as was brought up earlier by Susan, or work with those living with disabilities. As Father CJ brought up, Laura and I and others have spoken about this importance as well. Part of these is looking at what's available and what's not available in our community. Like just repeating what already exists, like is often a waste of energy, and just earning pride points. Look what we're doing. Whatever. But it's already been done by 50 other people in the city, and it's a waste of everyone's time. So why would we do that sort of thing? So part of it is looking at knowing our community and the resources and services that are on offer to people to meet the needs of that community, and then what isn't there and needs to be done. And discerning that is really important. And so I think there's some work to do around disability, for instance, that I think much more could be done in our community, though there's some being done, so how can we do that? Taking the ministries that are here, sorry, Claire, yeah, 1 second. So that we just mentioned, so worship, music, kids, youth, membership, refugee, among friends. What are the strengths and what are the challenges of these? One important challenge John brought up at the beginning, capacity, right? What do we have the capacity as a people without burnout, et cetera, to do? There are other challenges to specific things too. Kids and youth, we talked about the challenge of pandemic, the challenge of competing, sports and everything else and happening, all this stuff. Challenge of families for a generation, unlike previous generations, being completely disconnected from church and having no real church experience. There are obvious challenges to our refugee work as well. And we can talk more about those things. And challenges to membership and drawing new people are obvious. There may be challenges for people in our worship and things as well. Jane eloquently spoke to some of that in her personal, experience and living in that tension, right? So thinking through some of these key things are really important. And we don't have, I think we need to wrap up soon, but bringing out these central aspects of our identity can help us going forward with our parish life together and with these other parish meetings in a month. So it seems to make sense to me going forward that these key things we're bringing up, refugee resettlements, among friends, membership, kids, youth, worship, and music, that a month's meeting could be devoted to discussion and going deeper into these issues each. That seems to make sense to me. I don't know if that makes sense to others as a sort of way forward, right? A week could focus on our worship and liturgy and why we do what we do and what it means, and as well as what else could we be doing, et cetera, and on kids and youth, on refugee work, et cetera, to help people have a more direct engagement with what's happening. And maybe you will and maybe you won't volunteer with the amazing work that's happening with the beautiful families that are living with us from Afghanistan as refugees. But being a part of the conversation, right, can still be a contribution that one can make in this place going forward. Anything as we're trying to wrap up here, I would encourage, as we go away, that last question we were starting to address is what do we hope for our church community? Spend some time thinking about that, maybe in the coming week. What do we hope for ourselves as a congregation, for personally in our lives in this congregation, both what we receive and also what we give and offer to this community, because this is meant to be an offering, right? Not just a sort of consumerist enterprise where we take what we can. Even those, I think, who just need space in their life to come and sit in the back and leave and not talk to one-on-one and worship, right? That's the offering that they can make in that time. And it's beautiful and it's good, and then we receive it. But we come as offering, as gift to one another, and to receive the gift of one another. so thinking about those hopes and dreams and needs of our community and also of the wider community and how we are and aren't meeting them. One of the things about reaching the community, about being, as Lee was saying, even just the flag out front or whatever, with representing who we are to the community. The work that's done here through the refugee resettlement work, through Among Friends and other things, has made St. Paul's is known in the community, also as recovery groups. The recovery people in recovery call St. Paul's Recovery Central, right? Because we focus on it more than anyone else and have more meetings than anyone else. These things have, many churches are known for the pumpkin patch sale in the fall or the Christmas fair, right? Not bad things to be known for. But we are known for our love. People in the past year have stopped me in the streets in Newburyport who have never set foot inside this church and probably never will. Maybe they don't have any interest in being a Christian or following Jesus, but they've thanked me for our existence. And they're happy that we're here. Shared with the vestry yesterday that this past week got a letter from our representative, Seth Moulton, thanking us for the work that we do here. We're a church, right? And our congressional representation is thanking, sending a letter in thanks for what's happening here. I think that, and that really means something. And it also means that we need to be aware of all the work that's happening and the capacity of people, as John said, in caring for one another. There are volunteers who are strapped, right? There's priests who are strapped, and loving and supporting one another in the ways that we can is an important process, part of this. But it's also that I think we're known for the right things. And that we should really, really be excited about that. We're known for the right things. And it doesn't mean the place is going to be, 300 people in here every week packing things out. It doesn't mean that. But Jesus never promised that we would be the majority and have overloaded churches, right? It was always a small community, right, in the early church. In fact, in our reading today, he promised that you would be persecuted and hated by all because of my name, right? So, we shouldn't be discouraged that, we're not a 10,000 person megachurch in Texas. That doesn't say anything about what the community is, right? It could be some, complete cult who's about to drink the Kool-Aid. I don't know, but it doesn't say anything about what the content of the nature of the people, just to have 10,000 people in an arena setting, for a Sunday service. What it does say about the community is that type of acknowledgement from our city, from the surrounding world, and what we're known for. That really means something. And so be encouraged by that. And as we go forward, we can think about what that means and what our hopes might be for our future. And then provide some feedback too for these meetings. You can send me a note or something if you think there are certain things that we haven't mentioned that we should be focusing on each month as we gather. Let's close in prayer. Almighty God, for the gift of this community, for the gift of our work that you have graced us and called us to do, for the gift of your presence with us, and all your many gifts, we give you thanks. Make our lives gift of love and service to one another and to all in need. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.